We are diving today into perhaps the most famous and definitely the most infamous book on statecraft ever written, Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince.
It's a book that really shocked Europe when it came out in the 16th century.
And it still shocks people today, I think.
It absolutely does. It's a slim volume, yes, but its shadow is just colossal.
Mm.
I mean, Machiavelli created a political philosophy so effective, so cynical, that we still use his name as an adjective.
Machiavellian.
Exactly. To describe ruthless cunning and expediency.
Mm.
It just fundamentally changed how we talk about power.
And that notoriety is, completely earned when you read it. Our source material, the Mansfield translation, really highlights this shocking idea at the very heart of his realism.
Which is?
That if you succeed in politics, the result means, and this is a quote, you will be praised or not blamed.
Right. So ultimate success, even if it involves murder, it just washes away the sin of how you got there.
Exactly. Machiavelli isn't writing a moral guide. He's writing a guide to winning. Success, maintaining, and growing the state. That's the only thing that matters in this book.
If you can achieve mastery, history isn't going to judge your methods too harshly.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. To take this dense, challenging, but actually incredibly clear text and really distill its core philosophy. We're going to try and shortcut your understanding of how Machiavelli systematically breaks from every existing moral tradition.
Whether it's classical like Plato or Christian.
Yeah, he just sets them all aside to define a new political reality where the rules are entirely self-contained.
He really was the first to state it so explicitly. Before The Prince, political thinkers, they almost universally believed the state was limited by something higher.
Like divine law or natural law.
Yes, eternal moral virtue.
Hmm.
But Machiavelli argues that politics should be carried on for its own sake, with no limits from above. The only object is to acquire and to prevail. It's a whole new world.
Okay, let's unpack that. That central philosophical leap, this definitive break, it all comes down to a concept he calls the effectual truth.
Yes. The turning point is chapter 15. Machiavelli just announces that he departs from the orders of others, meaning, every political writer who came before him.
And his reason.
He says it's more fitting to go directly to the effectual truth of the thing than to the imagination of it.
That's a direct philosophical mic drop. He's basically dismissing 2,000 years of high-minded political theory.
Everything from Plato's ideal republic to St. Augustine's city of God. He calls those ideas imagined republics that have never been seen or known to exist in truth.
So, for you listening, the simple definition of effectual truth is what? Reality over imagination.
That's a great way to put it. He's arguing that if a prince only cares about how men should live, guided by some idealistic morality, he's going to fail.
Yeah.
He'll come to ruin among so many who are not good.
So the prince must learn to be able not to be good.
And crucially, use this ability or not according to necessity. So traditional moral goodness is actually lethal if you practice it all the time in a world full of flawed, often wicked people.
You can't survive as a pure angel among devils. You can't. And to really drive this home, you have to look at what's missing from the book.
What's not there?
Machiavelli never once mentions natural justice or natural law. Not here, not in any of his works.
And that silence is deafening. It's not an accident. For centuries, the entire classical and medieval tradition was built on that idea.
That political authority was limited by some universal moral structure.
But for Machiavelli, that framework, it doesn't exist. Justice seems to be the same as necessity. Whatever is necessary to survive, that's what's just.
The alternative is ruin, so there's no pre-existing moral limit on power. And this changes how he even defines a state. He doesn't classify them by their moral ends like Aristotle.
No, he classifies them by how they're acquired.
Yeah.
Which is a very economic-sounding term, right?
Yeah.
Like a transaction, a taking.
It is. Acquisition is the fundamental problem. He sort of dismisses the natural prince, the hereditary ruler, because that person just inherits everything.
But even that implies an original acquisition somewhere down the line. Exactly. And that original act of foundation, whether it's expelling someone, defrauding them, violence, it requires going outside the previous bounds of justice.
And then he says this is natural. In chapter 3, he says, it is a very natural and ordinary thing to desire to acquire.
So if acquisition is natural, offense is a certainty. A new prince has to always offend those over whom he becomes a new prince.
Which leads directly to that infamous rule for handling the offense.
It's one of the most chilling sentences in the book because it's so clinical. He advises men should either be caressed or eliminated.
Wow.
because they avenge themselves for slight offenses, but cannot do so for grave ones.
So the offense you do to a man should be so total that you don't have to fear his revenge.
Because he can't get revenge. It's
Yeah.
the effectual truth in horrifying practice. Complete political destruction to prevent any future threat.
That really sets the stage for his whole toolkit. With morality gone, the prince has a set of tools judged only by their practical result.
Right. So let's look at that toolkit, starting with the word he uses for the essential quality of a ruler. Virtue.
Yes, virtue. And this is a tricky one. It is not classical moral virtue.
Not at all. It's not courage, temperance, justice in the old sense. He completely redefines it. It's a prudent, well-taught capability to manage circumstances, to overcome fortune.
And maintain the state.
And it includes the ability to choose vice when survival requires it.
It sounds less like virtue and more like pure effectiveness, skill.
That's it, exactly. And he proves it by connecting it to criminals. In Chapter 8, he talks about Agathocles, who sees power through mass murder and betrayal.
But he calls him a man of great spirit and high intention.
Yes, and then he does this incredible pivot. He writes that one cannot call it virtue to kill one's citizens, betray one's friends.
So he seems to condemn it.
But then, in the very next sentence, he talks about the virtue of Agathocles.
Why? Why use the word virtue at all if he's immediately taking back the moral part?
Because he's making a distinction.
Yeah.
He's saying what Agathocles did was morally wicked, sure. But the sheer capability, the resolution, the successful execution of the plan, that political quality that led to mastery, that is virtue.
So virtue is the quality needed to win no matter the moral cost.
And that leads right to the issue of cruelty. You have to learn to be cruel effectively.
Which is necessary, he says, especially in new states which are full of dangers.
But there's a key distinction. He talks about cruelties well used and badly used. Well-used cruelties are done all at once out of necessity for self-defense, and then you turn them to the benefit of your subject.
And badly used.
They just continue and increase over time. They create instability.
So the idea is to get the horrible stuff done quickly, create stability, and then pivot to providing benefits so people forget the initial shock.
Exactly. Which brings us to that famous question. Is it better to be loved or feared?
Right. And he says ideally both. But if you have to choose.
It is much safer to be feared. And this is based on his very harsh view of human nature. Men love at their own convenience, he says, and they break those bonds easily.
But they fear at the convenience of the prince.
The dread of punishment, he writes, never forsakes you.
But you have to avoid being hated. That's the tightrope walk. Feared, but not hated. How do you do that?
By staying away from two things: the property and the women of your subjects.
And this is where he has that incredibly cold piece of political psychology.
Men forget the death of a father more quickly than the loss of a patrimony.
Chilling. So property is the deepest social bond. You can execute rivals, but don't take the common man's property or you'll generate a hatred that never goes away.
This logic also applies to virtues like generosity, or what he calls liberality. Most people think a prince should be generous.
But Machiavelli says that's a political trap.
A huge trap. To get a reputation for being liberal, you have to be lavish, which burns through your money. Then you have to tax people heavily.
Which leads directly to being hated.
The very thing you must avoid. So a smart prince should actually accept a reputation for being mean or stingy, because that parsimony lets him defend the state without burdening people.
And so paradoxically, he ends up being seen as liberal by the people because he takes so little from them. It's reputation management built on calculated vice.
The result is what matters, not the intention.
Okay, let's look at the capstone of this toolkit from Chapter 18, Deceit and Betrayal.
This is where he introduces that powerful metaphor of the prince needing to be both a beast and a man, specifically the fox and the lion.
The lion can't defend itself from snares. The fox can't defend itself from wolves.
So you need to be a fox to see the traps and a lion to scare the wolves. And his justification is simple. Since men are wicked and don't keep their promises, the prince doesn't have to keep his promises to them.
He must be a great pretender and dissembler.
Yes. And it works because, he believes, men are so simple that a deceiver will always find someone willing to be deceived. Your job as a ruler is constant performance.
Performance, deception, and, above all, securing the state. Which I think brings us to our next segment. For Machiavelli, this is almost entirely a military problem.
Entirely. He says a prince should have no other object nor any other thought but that of war. Neglecting this is the first way you lose your state.
And the army has to be your own. He's absolutely against mercenaries.
He calls them useless and dangerous.
Yeah.
He points to the shame of Italy at the time, where everyone relied on hired soldiers, and they were just impotent.
He has that great line about the King of France, Charles VIII, seizing Italy with chalk.
Right, he didn't even need a sword. He just needed chalk to mark the houses where his troops would stay, because there was no real resistance.
To really hammer this home, he retells the story of David and Goliath.
He does. In chapter 13, David refuses King Saul's armor, saying he can't fight well in borrowed gear.
But then Machiavelli adds a brutal detail that's not in the Bible.
He does. He says David used a knife he took from the fallen Goliath to cut off his head. It's a subtle twist, but it's pure Machiavelli.
David not only relies on his own skill, the sling, but he also makes sure the acquisition, the mastery, the final bloody act is all his own.
So once you have your own arms, you need internal allies. And Machiavelli says every city has two diverse humors.
The people who want not to be oppressed, and the great, the elites, who want to oppress.
A conflict that is just perpetual.
So who does the new prince ally with?
The people. Definitely the people. They're easier to satisfy. All they want is not to be oppressed. The great, on the other hand, see themselves as your equals and are always ready to conspire.
And you can't survive a hostile population.
You have no remedy in adversity. But the greats are few. They're replaceable. You can handle them.
So the state's stability rests on the people. But if you have to start with all this necessary cruelty we talked about, how do you win them over?
This brings us back to his favorite example, Caesar Borgia in Romagna.
Right. So Borgia takes over Romagna. It's a mess, full of chaos. He sends in his cruel minister, Ramiro de Orco, to clean house.
With fullest power. And Ramiro does. He brings order through terror and executions.
But everyone hates him for it.
Exactly. So once the job is done, once the necessary unconstitutional violence has worked, Borgia purges the purger.
He has Ramiro cut in half.
In half and displayed in the public square with a block and a bloody knife.
What's the political goal of a spectacle that terrifying?
Two things. First, it purges all the hatred. It puts all the blame on Ramiro. Second, it shows everyone where the real power lies. Borgia. The people are left at once satisfied and stupefied.
It's the effectual truth in action. A brutal problem solved with a brutal spectacle. This shows stable government is only possible after an unconstitutional beginning.
A necessary ruthless violence to lay the foundation.
Okay, for our final segment, let's look at the limits of all this human action. Let's talk about fortune.
This is where we confront fate.
Yeah.
In chapter 25, he asks how much of the world is governed by fortune and God, and how much is governed by us.
And he settles on about 50-50.
Roughly, yes. Half by fortune. And you'll notice he forgets about God in the second part of the calculation. It's just human agency, and half by man.
So we're not helpless. He compares fortune to a violent river.
Right. When it floods, it destroys everything. But you can build dikes and dams in quiet times. That's your virtue, your planning. You can prepare for when the flood comes.
The main problem, though, is that men have a fixed nature.
Exactly. Success requires you to adapt your methods to the times. You need to be cautious sometimes and impetuous other times, but men don't do that. A cautious man stays cautious, even when he needs to be bold.
And so they fall under fortune's control. So if you have to pick one fixed approach, which way should you lean?
Audacity. He concludes, it is better to be impetuous than cautious because fortune is a woman.
An incredibly provocative metaphor.
It is. And it is necessary, if one wants to hold her down, to beat her and strike her down. He is saying political success comes from aggressive, forceful action. You dominate circumstance.
And he ends the entire book with an emotional plea, an exhortation to seize Italy.
He does. He begs the Medici family to act. He describes Italy as broken, more enslaved than the Hebrews, without a head, without order.
And this redemption is justified by necessity.
By sheer necessity. He gives that famous line, "For war is just to whom it is necessary, and arms are pious when there is no hope but in arms."
So the big takeaway for you listening to this is that the prince forces us to confront not what politics should be, but what it is, the necessary actions for survival.
The only measure is the effectual truth of holding on to the state, no matter what it takes. It holds a mirror up to the raw reality of power.
But the final provocative thought has to return to that struggle between human agency and fate. If virtue requires all this relentless cruelty and deception, this abandonment of personal goodness.
Machiavelli makes the prince the master of his domain, yes. But given the high brutalizing cost, you have to ask, What are the true long-term consequences of achieving mastery by systematically rejecting our own humanity?
A question that is still completely unanswered in the political arena today. Thank you for guiding us through this challenging but absolutely essential text.